and no one is heard from the Kremlin. KGB officers in East Berlin seem unable to raise a response from their headquarters. The East German army prepares to take the steps necessary to reverse Schabowski's blunder. But for a crucial period of several hours that night, no one seems to be in charge of the border crossings at the wall.
So the border guards are standing there not knowing what to do. Tens, then hundreds, and then thousands of curious and sort of excited and then perhaps increasingly angry East Berliners are coming to the checkpoints. Finally, the border guards just give in and say, okay, go ahead. And the dam is burst.
Letting Easterners go west is one thing. Letting Westerners into the East is another thing entirely. If the GDR can't control its own borders, it is not a sovereign nation anymore. There's no going back now. West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl uses an old German saying to sum up the situation.
The pear is peeled. It's a phrase I use often for my home in the Pfalz. It means it's done.
The wall is falling. How far will the GDR and the Soviets go to battle the tide? What will happen to the East German officials whose mistakes have brought about this crisis?
Tatsache ist, dass wir diese Mitteilung auf der Pressekonferenz am Abend des 9. November.
The fact is, at the press conference of the evening of the 9th, the most dangerous security situation in East Germany ever arose. We were close to a civil war and nobody realized it.
On November 9th, 1989, history has reversed itself at the Berlin Wall. Because of a series of blunders only recently declassified, beginning with the mistaken announcement that travel restrictions were lifted, the border guards are now being challenged. East German Communist Party boss Egon Krenz is only now realizing the peril that he is in. Years later, historians unravel the truth.
This press conference of November 9th, 1989, it was a mistake. It was a mistake. It was a human failing on one of the top East German leaders. It wasn't supposed to happen this way at all.
At 1 a.m., the most severe challenge yet uncoils near the Brandenburg Gate. West Berliners look east and challenge the border. The communists have to act fast. The country is coming apart under their feet. Post-Cold War interviews with communist military officials reveal East German troops are ordered into a state of increased combat readiness in and around Berlin.
I went to the Brandenburg Gate, of course, and there were already the first people standing on the wall. The Vopo tried to drive them away by using the water guns, but they held on. Hundreds of East Berliners came over the border and hundreds of West Berliners were going into the opposite direction. Totally unknown strangers embraced each other and shouted, "Awesome."
Even one death would have been a sign, and I knew that. I had to decide, will there be bloodshed or will it go smoothly?
Desperate to prove that East Germany is still in control, the East German military sends squads of soldiers to contain the chaos at the Brandenburg Gate. 3 a.m. They begin to push back against the crowd. Finally, they clear the square. But by now, it is too late. The wall faces destruction.
I mean, that was one of the first things that happened. People started hammering at the wall immediately, as I remember, the next day, and they were hammering at it from both sides. And it was great because people were breaking through from both sides and finding each other and reaching through. It was amazing to see how people simply descended on the wall from both sides just to get rid of it, just to pull it apart themselves.
No one knows how the East German army and the secret police will respond to this new assault. Behind them stand the KGB and the Soviet army. It is easy to imagine they will respond harshly to provocation.
There was always a puzzle about what Moscow would do, whether Gorbachev would support repression or an opening, whether there were other forces in Moscow, particularly in the military, that might have wanted a crackdown.
Who knew? Who knew? Chancellor Kohl didn't know. I didn't know. I'm not sure Gorbachev knew. And I'm damn sure Mitterrand and Margaret Thatcher didn't know. We didn't know how all this monumental event would affect the pride of the Soviet military, the nationalist feeling that the Soviet Empire had. And here it was crumbling right in front of their eyes. How would they react? Nobody knew for sure.
The GDR Central Command issues a final ruling about the events of that night. As of 8 a.m., the travel rules will be enforced as written. No more free trips to the west and no trips to the east. The East German government is determined not to be rendered completely irrelevant. Meanwhile, reality and communist rhetoric set out in distinctly different directions.
Events moved so swiftly that people essentially took control of this situation and tore down their government.
40,000 tanks were concentrated in the GDR. They were capable of crushing all resistance and triumphing over any opponent.
Mit dem ich mehr als Diplomatie verband.
They get a phone call from the Soviet diplomat, and he said in a very serious tone, Moscow is surprised about how the situation at the Berlin Wall happened last night.
The KGB and Kremlin experts finally catch up with the events of the previous night. They demand that the East Germans bring the situation to heel and offer the GDR anything they need in terms of military support. After all, the forces of the Warsaw Pact are massed around Germany. Recently revealed documents disclose that the East Germans mobilized 2 elite urban combat units in response to increasingly angry Soviet communiques. In the end, it is the man who promoted Glasnost who breaks the impasse.
I found out about the events on November 10th from the ambassador. The ambassador told me about Shabovsky's announcement and that they had opened the borders. I said that their actions were correct. On the TV screens, I could see how people expressed their feelings. This proved that the question of unification of Germany had passed over to the most important level, the level of the people.
The East Germans finally give in and stand down. Like everyone else, the soldiers and border guards catch the scent of freedom and celebration.
Grüßen von Mikhail Sergeyevich.
I talked with Kajamasov. He told me, Comrade Kantz, the Soviet leadership congratulates you on your courageous decision to open up the wall last night.
Communist Party bosses like Egon Krenz miraculously find themselves congratulated by the Soviets. The war was over, the longest war of the 20th century. With the fall of the Berlin Wall, the Cold War was at an end. Berlin, scarred and wounded by the decades it suffered at the front lines, Berlin became the scene of celebrations.